The wails of a newborn echoed within the small hut as Margaret lay exhausted on the mat, her body aching from labor. Mama Esther, the village midwife, wrapped the tiny infant in an old cloth, her gentle eyes full of warmth. "It's a girl," she announced, her voice soft and tender. "Such a beautiful child." But as Margaret strained to lift her head, a cold wave of unease washed over her. The joy she had anticipated was absent, replaced by a lingering fear she couldn't explain. When Margaret finally gazed at her daughter, the baby's eyes seemed unfocused, blankly staring into nothingness. Mama Esther waved her hand before the infant's face, her expression shifting to sorrow. She cannot see," she murmured. The words pierced Margaret's heart. "What are you saying?" she whispered, panic rising. "Your daughter is blind," Mama Esther confirmed, her voice heavy with sympathy. In that moment, the air felt suffocating, and Margaret's dreams of a happy life shattered into countless pieces. News of the baby's blindness spread swiftly through the village. The once curious whispers outside the hut transformed into murmurs of pity and scorn. "Accursed child," someone muttered. "An omen of misfortune," another voice added. Margaret's body trembled as she imagined the cruel words echoing for years to come. Her heart sank, and a bitter tear slipped down her cheek. Who would marry a blind girl? What kind of life awaited her daughter? Margaret remembered the baby's father, who had passed away months earlier, leaving her alone to face the world's harsh judgments. Now, burdened with a child that society would never fully accept, she felt the crushing weight of isolation. That night, as her daughter whimpered softly beside her, Margaret struggled with overwhelming fears, her heart twisted with pain and guilt. She did not know how to protect her child from the cruel world, or herself from the life of loneliness that awaited them both. The moon shone brightly as Margaret walked through the dense forest, her steps unsteady. The night was filled with the rustling of leaves and distant howls, but she pushed forward, her heart pounding. In her trembling arms lay her baby, whose small cries seemed to pierce the darkness. Margaret stopped beneath an ancient tree, her body frozen with fear and sorrow. She looked around, hoping for a sign, a miracle that would change her mind. But the shadows offered no solace. Tears streamed down her face as she gently laid her baby on a patch of soft grass. Her voice shook as she whispered, "I'm sorry. I can't do this." She turned away, her body trembling, each step heavier than the last. As her child's cries grew louder, Margaret's resolve wavered. "Just keep walking," she told herself. "Someone will find her, someone will care for her." But deep down, she knew no one ever came to this part of the forest. With a final glance at her daughter, Margaret ran, her heart breaking with each step, leaving behind the one soul who needed her the most. Dr. Samuel rode through the dark forest on his weary horse, returning from a distant village where he had treated sick children. The night was silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves. Suddenly, he heard the faint wail of a baby. He stopped, his heart quickening as he strained to listen. Guided by the cries, he moved toward an old tree, where he found a tiny bundle wrapped in cloth, lying on the cold ground. His chest tightened as he lifted the fragile baby, her cries softening as she felt his warm embrace. "Who would abandon you here?" he murmured, his voice choked with emotion. Cradling her close, Dr. Samuel mounted his horse and rode swiftly toward his home. The night air was cold, but the baby's warmth against his chest filled him with determination. She had been abandoned, but he would not let her be forgotten. Fate had brought him to her, and he was resolved to give her a chance at life. Dr. Samuel arrived at his modest home just as dawn broke, his heart heavy yet hopeful. His wife Mary sat by the fire, waiting for his return. Her eyes widened when she saw the tiny baby in his arms. "Samuel, whose child is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. He gently handed the baby to her, his face solemn. "I found her abandoned in the forest. Someone left her to die." Mary's eyes filled with tears as she cradled the infant close. The baby's soft whimpers tugged at Mary's heart, and she knew she could not turn her away. "She needs us," Samuel whispered, his gaze unwavering. Mary looked down at the child's innocent face, her heart swelling with love. "Then we will care for her," she vowed. Together, they named her Grace, believing she was a gift meant to bring light to their lives. That night, Grace slept soundly in a warm bed, surrounded by love. The shadows of the forest were far behind, but the journey ahead was just beginning. Years passed, and Grace grew under the nurturing care of Samuel and Mary. Despite her blindness, she was a curious child, always eager to explore the world through touch and sound. Mary patiently guided her tiny hands over different textures, teaching her the feel of smooth stones, rough bark, and soft petals. Samuel watched in awe as Grace navigated their home confidently, her other senses sharper than most. Though she could not see the world around her, Grace felt it deeply. She listened to the birds' melodies, the rustle of leaves, and the laughter of children playing nearby. Her joyful spirit was contagious, and she became the heart of their small household. But as Grace grew older, she began to notice she was different. She couldn't see the smiles on her parents' faces or the colors they often described. Despite this, she refused to let her blindness define her. She was determined to live fully, embracing the love that surrounded her. One morning, Mary called Grace into the house with a warm smile. "I have something for you, my dear." She placed a small wooden flute into Grace's hands. Grace's fingers explored the smooth surface curiously. "What is this, Mama?" she asked. "It's a flute," Mary explained. "I want you to learn to play it. Music is seen with the heart, not just the eyes." Grace's face lit up with excitement. From that day on, Grace practiced diligently, blowing into the flute and experimenting with the notes. At first, the sounds were rough and uneven, but she never gave up. She spent hours under the shade of the old tree in their yard, letting the music flow from her heart. With time, her melodies grew more beautiful, echoing through the village and touching the hearts of those who listened. Grace's blindness did not stop her. It only made her music more profound. She played not just to be heard, but to be felt. Grace's enchanting music captured the attention of the villagers. At first, they were wary, remembering the whispers about her being cursed. But as they listened to her soulful melodies, their prejudices began to fade. Her music was filled with innocence, hope, and love, melting even the hardest of hearts. People gathered outside her home, captivated by the blind girl who played with such emotion. Some even approached her parents, apologizing for their past judgments. "We were wrong," they admitted. "She is a blessing, not a curse." Samuel and Mary's hearts swelled with pride, grateful that Grace was finally being embraced by the community. Grace, unaware of the change she had brought, simply continued to play, her music a bridge that connected her to the world she could not see. Through her melodies, she found acceptance and purpose, not just for herself but for all who heard her. One evening, as Grace played under the stars, Dr. Samuel watched her with tearful eyes. Her talent was undeniable, her spirit unbreakable, yet he couldn't help but wonder how different her life might be if she could see. He had examined countless patients in his career, but had never closely examined Grace's condition. Curiosity and hope ignited within him. What if her blindness could be cured? That night, Samuel pored over his medical books, searching for answers. He read about various eye conditions and treatments, his heart racing with each possibility. The next day, he gently examined Grace's eyes, his hands trembling as he conducted several tests. The results left him stunned. Her blindness wasn't permanent. It was caused by a condition that could potentially be treated with surgery, but the procedure was expensive, far beyond what they could afford. Despite this, Samuel made a promise to himself. He would do everything in his power to help Grace see the world she so beautifully painted with music. The realization that Grace's sight could be restored filled Samuel with hope, but the cost was staggering. He calculated every expense, from the surgery to the journey to the city where the specialist resided. It was more than his modest earnings could cover. Desperation gnawed at him as he wondered how to gather the necessary funds. He could not bear to see Grace live in darkness when there was a chance for light. He shared his findings with Mary, who wept with joy and fear. "If only we had the means," she whispered. Determined, Samuel made up his mind to find a way. He took on more patients, working late into the night, and began saving every coin he could. He even sold his precious heirlooms, gifts from his late father, to raise money. Grace remained blissfully unaware, her laughter echoing through their home. Samuel watched her with renewed hope, envisioning the day she would open her eyes, and see the world for the first time. News of Dr. Samuel's efforts to restore Grace's sight spread throughout the village. The people, once judgmental, were now moved by his unwavering love and sacrifice. One by one, they came forward, offering their support. Farmers donated crops, artisans crafted goods to sell, and neighbors contributed whatever little they could spare. She gave us the gift of music, they said. It's our turn to give back. A community fundraiser was organized, and villagers gathered to help. They sold food, handmade crafts, and even livestock to raise money for Grace's surgery. Grace played her flute at the event, unaware of the cause, but happy to bring joy to others. Her music inspired generosity, and donations poured in. Samuel and Mary were overwhelmed by the kindness and unity of the village. It seemed that Grace's light had touched more lives than they realized. With the funds finally gathered, Samuel prepared for the journey to the city where Grace's surgery would take place. It was a bittersweet moment as they packed their belongings. Grace was excited, unaware of the true purpose of their trip. "Are we going on an adventure, Papa?" she asked, her face glowing with joy. Samuel forced a smile, his heart heavy with anxiety. "Yes, my child, an adventure." The villagers gathered to bid them farewell, their faces filled with hope and prayers. Many hugged Grace tightly, their eyes moist with emotion. "Come back to us with new eyes, child," an elder whispered. Grace smiled, her fingers tracing the old woman's face to recognize her. "I will," she promised, her voice full of innocence. Mary fought back tears as she embraced their neighbors, grateful for their love and support. As they boarded the wagon, Grace's flute was safely tucked under her arm. She promised to play for everyone when they returned. The journey began, the familiar sights of the village fading behind them. Samuel held Grace close, whispering silent prayers for her safety and for the miracle that awaited them. The journey was long and exhausting, but they finally arrived in the bustling city. Grace's senses were overwhelmed by the unfamiliar sounds and scents. She clung to Samuel's arm, her excitement mingling with fear. "It's so noisy, Papa," she whispered. Samuel gently reassured her, guiding her through the crowded streets to the hospital. The city was unlike anything Grace had ever known. The voices were louder, the footsteps quicker, and the air was filled with strange smells. Yet she held her father's hand tightly, trusting his guidance. At the hospital, they were welcomed by Dr. Abbasi, a renowned surgeon known for his expertise in restoring sight. "I've heard about your daughter's remarkable spirit," he said, smiling warmly. "I will do everything in my power to help her see." Grace sensed the tension in Samuel's voice as he spoke with Dr. Abbasi, but she did not question it. She felt safe with her parents by her side. As they settled in, Grace played her flute softly, her music drifting through the sterile hallways of the hospital, soothing the anxious hearts of her family. The night before the surgery, Grace sat by the window, feeling the cool breeze on her face. Samuel knelt beside her, his voice gentle. "Grace, tomorrow you'll go through something special, something that might help you see." Grace's heart skipped a beat. "See, like you and Mama?" she asked, her voice trembling. Samuel nodded, his eyes filling with tears. "Yes, my child. There is a chance you may see the world around you." Grace's hands covered her mouth in shock. She had never imagined this could be possible. She could only dream of colors, faces, and the sky. "Will it hurt?" she asked softly. Samuel held her close. "A little, but you are the bravest girl I know." Grace leaned against him, her heart pounding with excitement and fear. "If I see, will you be the first thing I look at?" she whispered. Samuel's voice broke as he replied, "Yes, my darling, I promise." They held each other tightly, knowing tomorrow would change their lives forever. Grace's mind raced with questions, but she found comfort in her father's embrace, trusting his love more than anything else. The morning arrived, heavy with anticipation. Grace was prepped for surgery, her small body engulfed by the hospital gown. Mary kissed her forehead, her tears soaking into Grace's hair. "Be brave, my love," she whispered. Grace smiled, feeling the warmth of her mother's touch. Samuel walked beside her as she was wheeled into the operating room, his heart racing. "I'll be here when you wake up," he promised. Dr. Abbasi's reassuring voice echoed in the sterile room. "You are safe, Grace. Close your eyes and dream beautiful dreams." Grace clutched her flute, which she had insisted on bringing with her, and drifted off to sleep. The surgery began, delicate and precise, as Dr. Abbasi worked tirelessly to restore her sight. Hours passed, each second feeling like an eternity to Samuel and Mary, who sat outside, praying fervently. Finally, Dr. Abbasi emerged, his face weary but smiling. The surgery was successful, he announced. Relief flooded Samuel and Mary as they embraced each other. She will need time to heal, but there is hope, he added. They wept with joy, their prayers answered. Days passed before Grace was allowed to open her eyes. Her heart raced as Samuel held her hand. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice shaking. Grace nodded, her body trembling with anticipation. Dr. Abbasi carefully removed the bandages, his movements slow and gentle. "Open your eyes, Grace," he whispered. Blinking, Grace's vision was blurry at first, a haze of light and shadows, but gradually, shapes began to form. She gasped, her eyes widening as the world around her came into focus. She saw colors, vivid, beautiful colors she had only imagined. Tears streamed down her face as she looked up at Samuel, whose face was overwhelmed with emotion. "Papa, is that you?" she asked, her voice quivering. Samuel sobbed, nodding as he embraced her. "Yes, my child, it's me." Grace looked at Mary, seeing her mother's tearful smile for the first time. "Mama, you're beautiful," she whispered, her heart overflowing with love. The family held each other tightly, their dreams finally realized. Grace's world was no longer dark. It was filled with light, love, and hope. Grace's days were filled with wonder as she explored the world with new eyes. Every color, every face, and every leaf fascinated her. She would sit by the window for hours, watching the sun paint the sky with hues she had never known. "So this is blue?" she asked Samuel, pointing at the vast sky. He nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "Yes, Grace, that's blue." She marveled at flowers, their vibrant petals bursting with color. "I've touched these before," she whispered, her fingers brushing the delicate blooms. "But seeing them? It's magic." Her laughter filled the house, her joy contagious. Samuel and Mary watched in awe as Grace embraced her newfound vision, her spirit unbroken. She spent hours learning to match faces with voices she had long known by sound. She was astonished by the villagers who came to visit, their expressions now visible to her. "I've always known your smiles," she told them, "but now I can see them." Grace's blindness had once been her limitation, but now, with sight, she discovered a new world waiting to be explored. After weeks of recovery, it was time for Grace to return home. The journey back felt different. Every landscape, every tree, and every cloud was a new discovery. She marveled at the dancing leaves, the sparkling river, and the vibrant sky. "Everything is so beautiful, Papa," she whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. Samuel's heart filled with gratitude, his sacrifice rewarded by her joy. When they arrived at the village, the people gathered, their eyes fixed on Grace. She stepped down from the wagon, her gaze moving over familiar voices now matched with faces. Tears welled up as she recognized those who had loved and supported her. "Mama Ya!" she exclaimed, running to the elder woman who had always held her close. "I see you." The woman wept, embracing Grace with trembling arms. "Welcome back, child. You truly are a miracle." Grace's fingers found her flute, and she played a melody of gratitude and joy. The villagers stood in awe, their hearts touched by her music. Grace was no longer just the blind girl. She was a symbol of hope and resilience, inspiring everyone around her. As Grace settled back into village life, she began to notice whispers and glances. Curiosity burned within her. "Why do they look at me like that, Mama?" she asked one evening. Mary hesitated, her heart heavy with the secret she had kept for years, but Grace was no longer a child. She deserved the truth. Sitting by the fire, Samuel took a deep breath. "Grace, there is something you must know. You were abandoned at birth. I found you in the forest, left to die." Grace's world shattered, her vision blurred with tears. "Why would someone do that?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Samuel held her tightly. "I do not know her reasons, but I do know this. You are loved. You are our daughter, no matter how you came to us." Grace's heart ached, but she felt the strength of her parents' love, Who was she? She asked. Samuel hesitated. Her name was Margaret. She was from this village. Grace's mind raced, memories flooding back of a woman she had heard about but never met. A woman who always avoided her gaze. She knew what she had to do. The next day, Grace walked through the village, her steps steady. She found Margaret by the well, her body frail, her face etched with sorrow. Margaret's eyes widened in shock as Grace approached. You can see?" she stammered, her voice trembling. Grace nodded, her eyes never leaving Margaret's face. "Yes, I can see everything now." Margaret fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. I am so sorry," she choked. "I was afraid of the whispers, the shame. I was weak." Her body shook with sobs as she pleaded. "Can you ever forgive me?" Grace's heart softened. She saw the pain, the guilt, the years of torment in Margaret's eyes. Kneeling beside her, Grace took Margaret's hands in hers. "I was blind once, but now I see with more than just my eyes. I see your pain, your fear, and your regret. I forgive you." Margaret wept, her body collapsing in relief. Grace embraced her, their tears mingling. The villagers watched in silence, witnessing the power of forgiveness. Grace's heart was free, her spirit unbroken. She had found her truth, her family, and her destiny. As the sun set over the village, Grace played her flute, her melody echoing with hope, love, and healing.